Okay, so we've been talking in great detail, and I've kind of been on a couple of panels, and I think there's a misconception that I'm the anti-automation guy at ONUG, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. What I'm actually concerned about is how we operationalize software-defined networks and things that are highly automated. So what we're going to talk about today is that topic and software managed infrastructure and how we actually we don't bring the sins of the past with us as we go along this journey. So let's let the rest of our panel introduce themselves. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm Gabriel Snook. I work at Netflix. I'm a network developer, so I build systems and write software for acquiring data, storing data, representing data, and some automation pieces.
And Tim Verrill, I'm a network engineer at Intel. Basically, the wide area network, everything other than the data center, actually.
Hi, I'm Anis Sheikh. I'm from the Google Network Operations team. For the last year and a half or so, I've been primarily focused on our management infrastructure, primarily on configuration and monitoring and how we can transform that to move forward.
Okay, great, guys. So let's start talking a little bit about those sins of the past, or in many cases, the sins of today. So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, and I'm not talking about network management tools, but again, things like SNMP, syslog, SFlow, NetFlow, all those type of things. Can we talk a little bit about why those things are not sufficient as we move into more software-defined networks? We can go right down the panel, or however you like to jump in.
I don't know if I'd really say that they're insufficient so much as they don't work together today. I think the number one thing with all those pieces, you need to standardize. If you're getting data from SFlow, NetFlow, SNMP, streaming telemetry, you're going to have to process that as it comes out of your routers and switches so that it all looks the same whenever you present it. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to agree with that. I don't think that they're insufficient. We live by them. But the putting it all together in one place and making it comprehensible, this is a challenge. We've ended up writing a lot of our own sort of middleware or normalization. I'm really not expecting the industry to deliver me normalized data, because I think we'll much older before that happens. But having some way to get that normalized without having to custom write it every time you get a new vendor or a new product or a new service would be hugely useful. And with SDN, you've just got this whole new package of new data in an even more abstracted form.
Yeah, so I'll disagree a little bit on a couple of points here. We do use all those technologies, but SNMP in particular, and of course CLI is turning out to be a major pain point for us. Scaling SNMP, especially if you're starting to look at larger platforms, the density of the platforms is increasing so much. It may not be an issue for an enterprise network, but I'm speaking from our own experience. When we're putting some of the most dense boxes out there and deploying them and trying to manage and monitor them with SNMP, it's easy to make them basically melt and fall over. So we need a more scalable way to do monitoring that will lend itself to an extensible common format. I also don't think that we should give up so easily on trying to get the industry to give us common data formats. We're actually trying to push that agenda strongly from the perspective of Google teaming up with other network operators. And I can get into that later in the panel, but I think that's something that we need to continue to push. Otherwise, we're just never going to get there. It's long overdue.
So as we move from the provisioning and the troubleshooting, is it possible to do the network automation and the orchestration of the services that we need to provide for our business model? How do we get to that orchestration and provide that same visibility?
Limit your data sets. Yeah, I think, in a multi-vendor switches, routers, it's a really hard problem to solve with the way the industry is built now. And then, if you're going to make it work, you need a lot of homogenous stuff out there that isn't in the best interest of the vendors. So I'm not sure we can get there with the current paradigm. I think maybe it comes down to us coming up with standards for middleware and for acquisition of data to make those decisions to actually interact with the devices.
Yeah, and I'll make this relatively short, but even in the SD-WAN pictures that we've heard today, not one of them can work with each other. It's all proprietary, and it's going to be really hard to get them motivated, especially this early on, to actually create an interoperable standard. And I think we're going to have the same problem with everything. One big concern I do have, though, as we automate and orchestrate, is who's going to troubleshoot this later. When something breaks and you've got to go beyond the GUI, and it's all been automated, and the only people you have are the people who push the go button, you're calling someone else to get it fixed.
Yeah, maybe let's double-click that for a second. We talked about hybrid cloud and hybrid cloud framework. To me, it seems like that becomes, it's one issue when I own everything, and I can work through that, and I can work through the CLIs and the MIBs and all the different type of things that I need to pull out and normalize. It's hard work, but I think it's achievable. What about when I'm dealing with a split infrastructure that's both on private and public? Is that in the realm of the possible?
With a lot of heavy lifting, probably. I mean, nothing's impossible. But what is your effort level for what your return is? What's your effort for your return?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would agree with Gabriel. It's possible, but difficult. I think one of the things that we get from moving towards a place where we're exporting data in a common way is that we can actually start to normalize the view that we get from the public cloud infrastructure with our own private cloud infrastructure, right? So when we can start to correlate across the two, it gives us some of the tools that we need to be able to do troubleshooting and diagnostics in collaboration with, of course, the cloud provider. I mean, we provide hybrid cloud services today. We work really hard on providing enough visibility to our own operations teams to get the data they need to do troubleshooting. And we're definitely interested in providing views of that data to customers as well so that they can do some of this.
So we were thinking about across the full infrastructure stack, the difficulty for the hybrid cloud. What steps do we need to start to realize this? What do we need from the vendors? What do we as a user community need to ask for? We need that standard format. We've talked about that here as an open standard format, taking the data from vendor to vendor. But what are those, what visibility, what are we going to be asking for?
Since I got the mic. So we already discussed this really. It's about you need the common information or you have to hand the whole thing over. So you can either outsource the whole package, in which case you pick up a phone. Otherwise, you need some common data so that you can tie what you've got in your public to your private, and your public may be many publics, not just one. And being able to get a common look and feel across them is going to become really important.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned full stack, so I'm taking that to mean basically, all the way from your physical layer through your application layer, right? So, again, I'd echo what Tim said about having some level of coherency between the information models or the data models at each of those layers. I think we've put a lot of focus in the work we've been doing at, maybe L3 and L1. I think there's a lot more work to do, for example, in L7 infrastructure, bringing the same ideas there and pushing that part of the industry towards embracing this. I think it's already happening in one segment. It's sort of not reached the rest of the stack quite yet, and we need to push for that as users.
Yeah, so that's a good segue. So Nick previewed it yesterday morning, and the open network state format is sort of the ONUG Community's initiative to get behind the advocacy of these common data models, right? We're, as been said over and over, we're not a standards body. We're looking to say, look, this is something we want from the community. Now, we'll help define requirements, drive that into industry to build. And so that's what we're launching today and through this conference. I think, what I would like to sort of ask the panel, we're throwing data models around, but what does that really mean? What is a data model, and what does a common data model get me? What's the value?
I'll go with first, what does it get you? It gets you the ability to see everything you have and everything that's going on in a single pane, and be able to understand it all in the same manner. What is a data model and how does it work? The network state's a good place to start, because that's one of the pillars of any automation you're going to do, and any coloring of telemetry data as it comes from your system, so you can see it in one view. You need the network state. You need to be able to add in interface descriptions to flow data as it comes in, because flow data is messy. You need to be able to add country codes, geo tags, whatever. And so what we need to define is, what is a network state data model? What should it include? What extra stuff? How is it typed? Are they arrays? Are they lists? Or those things should all be standardized and codified, so that we can do less work on the development side and have to parse all these different things like we do today.
I'm going to tell you, I wish I had an answer, but so much of what you said I agree with, but we have to add into the whole correlation engine. How do I know that physical interface, which queue, which flow came through that queue, what's my current state? Right now, at least we have built a very complex correlation engine, which is really not sustainable for us. But ultimately, I want to be able to put all of that data in one place and run big data analytics on it, so that I can become much more predictive of what's happening, instead of going back and saying, this is what happened yesterday. I want to tell people what's going to happen in an hour and be able to avoid it.
Yeah, so I've been living and breathing data models for the last, 18 months or so. So I think there's definitely a lot of benefit. For us, very concretely, we want to be able to introduce new technology into our network on a sort of best of breed basis, right? The most reliable, best cost, lowest power, whatever it is, whatever metrics we're using to choose platforms going forward. If that technology introduction is going to take me a year, let's say, hypothetically, or maybe not so hypothetically, to do all the integration I need with my management systems, my monitoring systems, all the testing and so forth. So leave aside all the feature testing, but just the integration with our tool chain takes a tremendous amount of time when there's a new vendor introduced, a new platform from a vendor that we already have, a new maybe version of the software that vendors are bringing in. If I can get rid of that problem, I have a lot more freedom in how I introduce technology into the network. So the data model gives me a way to say that, if you bring a new platform in and I'm trying to configure BGP, it's exactly the same as it was on this other platform that I had or in the previous generation. And the data that I get back about state of the sessions, the number of routes being sent back and forth, all of that also looks the same. It's the same types, it's the same structure, it's the same semantics. So the benefit of the data model is it frees me from all those proprietary integrations that I need to do, both for monitoring and for configuration. So there's tremendous value. I think that we're getting to a point where we're building now some middleware layers through automation frameworks that will do all the translations on the bottom end for us. But at the end of the day, we're still writing those translations ourselves. I think we need to get to a point where we're asking vendors to support common data models for all this information. And I don't subscribe to the idea that this homogenizes or decreases the value proposition of vendors. I don't believe that vendors should try to differentiate on their CLI or their management model, right? They should be differentiating on the features they support, the reliability of the box, the cost per port, whatever it is, right? Those metrics are the ones that matter. I want to make the management plane much easier to integrate with.
So technology infrastructure is all about short-term competitive advantages, right? Someone will develop a new feature, and then everybody else in the industry will copy it, right? So I'm just kind of building on your point, because I think I agree with you completely. It would seem to me if a new vendor should differentiate on features, but also bring a data model with it, because that it's going to be copied. There's no question, right? And so I agree with that, or.
Yeah, I'll just comment quickly and then let my co-panelists. But Yeah, so we shouldn't be kind of under the illusion that we're never going to have to deal with any vendor proprietary data. As you said, new features will be introduced on one platform. We're going to have to extend the model that we're using to support that new feature. Other vendors will start to support it. That means that new feature then becomes part of the standard model at some point in the future. But there is this transition period, and we're going to have to build our management systems, our NMSs, to be able to deal with that. So there's no question. Whether you build it yourself in-house or you contract with an ISV to sort of build it for you or to partner with, we obviously have a few software developers in our organization, so we tend to build these things ourselves. But there's ISVs that are coming in the space that can do this for you. But the point is, this sort of hybrid world is going to continue because of what you said. But I think if we have 90% the same and 10% is vendor specific for some features or some platform characteristics, I think we've made a big leap forward.
Agreed.
So I think that goes to the brownfield. We have the ability to do the brownfield. It may require enlistment of some ISVs or some partners if we don't want to do the heavy lifting. If we've got the teams, we can do it ourselves. But the ultimate state is to get to what we would term greenfield right now, but be able to take that which we have, that which we own, that which we operate along with us. And it's possible.
That sounds really hard. It requires a lot of cooperation from the vendors to get there. Otherwise, even if we get the cooperation from the vendors today for the platforms we own today, you're still going to need it for the next set of platforms, and it's extremely difficult. I think the first thing you need to figure out is these bottom layers, which is your state database and the things that you're going to run analytics on, your metrics. Everything comes from there.
Actually, today, even the complexity of just taking NetFlow and going back and collecting interface information so that you can tie those two together, just that is hard enough. If you want to throw QoS information in there, or queuing information, or any routing information, or anything that changed, you're building a pretty custom environment. And to get that from the vendors would be really handy. For us, I haven't seen a greenfield in years. We don't get to build new, we get to augment anywhere. Even inside a data center, we never build a new one. We're maybe swapping some rows out, but it's never green.
So you disagree with my statement yesterday that there are greenfield opportunities everywhere?
There are, they're just very little.
Little, very good.
Like 2 rows in my data center is not a greenfield opportunity. If someone got to that in front of before you.
Unless you can consolidate all your data center in it, then it becomes interesting.
Look, I think there's an approach for brownfield that could work. And yes, it's a really hard problem. So we're trying to introduce this automation and data models certainly in all the new technology platforms that we look at. So what do we do with the ones that don't support it today and aren't going to support it anytime soon? I mean, the value of even having a common data model then is at least you can use that as a normalization layer for all of your tooling upstream, right? And yes, you have to maintain some translations and some integrations for some of your platforms, but the investment in that means that, your tools upstream will continue to work with your new platforms and your old, and hopefully you're not sort of expanding your legacy footprint so that you have to make a lot of changes once you've got something that works with your set of configs and the set of data you care about. So I think there is a path forward there. I'm not arguing it's easy. It requires a bunch of development and work, but it can be accommodated, and this is what we're trying to do.
Great. Any questions? Oh, go ahead.
So is one of the advantages that Google have, and many of the tier ones have, is that they do have this DevOps environment and they can throw developers at problems. For a lot of us in the enterprise space, our DevOps is 2 people, and if one of them's ill, you're in trouble. And so we're totally reliant on the vendors for a lot of this. And our management platforms are really what we can get from them. And a lot of the time, we're not funded to do an ISV either. So we've got to try and get vendors to play along so that they at least keep it consistent within a vendor. It would be really nice if they were consistent across vendors, but we even struggle inside one vendor.
So let me build a question on that. Does that also lead, though, to open source being a path forward for these type of solutions? If you're leveraging the power of community to start developing solutions, and you're not always looking at your in-house development teams because they may be limited, thoughts on open source versus consuming it?
Yes, I'll start first since I got the mic again. But for us, we tried it. We do use lots of pieces of open source. What we can't do is put it together without some of that DevOps. And so you might use Cacti for one thing and SmokePig for another thing, but it would be really nice to be able to integrate them into it. And we just don't have the resource to do this.
Yeah, I think for a lot of places it's resource intensive to go open source. You know, you got to choose the right database structure, ideally not relational if you're dealing with lots of data. This is a really hard problem. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think open source gives you a head start, or at least gives you a start, but there's a lot more work to do to integrate with the rest of your OSS systems, right, your NMS. So it certainly helps on the consumability path, but it doesn't get you all the way there. You know, I think one thing that's great to see, if you don't know, I mean, so vendors are actually coming out with stacks now that support streaming telemetry. I'm talking major vendors, Arista, Cisco, Juniper. So we're getting to a place where these devices can push, you know, key bits of their data out to your collector infrastructure. And they're also, on top of that, providing some open source stacks that allow you to stand up something that can act as a collector very quickly. So you can at least start working with this stuff, seeing what the data looks like, how you're going to integrate it. We're not yet at the point where everyone's exporting data using a common data model, but we're going to get there. So we're pushing to get to that step. But I think at least you start to be able to build the skeleton around what would be required in your automation and monitoring infrastructure with some of the open source tools that are out there. And vendors are themselves making this tool chain available, and you know, with the expectation that others will contribute to it. But the fact that, you know, Cisco has published, or Arista or Juniper has a stack on GitHub that you can download and start using with one of their boxes means that, you know, you can probably ask them questions about it. You can get a little bit of support, even if all of you guys here are big customers of theirs. So I think it's not all that gloomy, but again, I mean, open source is just the first step. I think there's a lot more work.
I just added that, yeah, with the streaming telemetry and the more programmatic access we have to some of these new vendor platforms, Arista, Cisco, maybe that opens up an opportunity for this group to actually write some of those, not just the data model, but the actual telemetry streaming clients that run on the boxes, right?
So what efforts are there today for open data models?
Well, I will now put the plug in for OpenConfig, I guess. Yeah, so this is one effort that we started. It's very informal, right? So we don't have a group with members and membership or any signed agreements. We're not Linux Foundation. This is a group of network operators, mostly engineers and architects at a bunch of operators who have come together to try to address this problem, right? Build data models, at least starting at the infrastructure layer where we have roughly the same set of problems, and we can all agree on what a common data model needs to look like for things like MPLS or BGP or interfaces or tunnels, or, you know, a long list of things at that layer, QoS, ACLs, all of that, right? So we are publishing data models that are sort of built and devised by operators, right? So, you know, nothing against vendors. We have to work closely with vendors to get the models implemented natively on platforms, and that's another part of what OpenConfig is doing. But the first step is to get operators driving what the models look like. They have to be operationally sensible, right, as opposed to try to expose every feature that a vendor might have on a platform. So I would say our models aren't exhaustive, but I would say that we try to be operationally complete. That is, cover the key use cases across web scale guys like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, traditional telcos like BT, Verizon, AT&T, and cable operators, Cox, Comcast. What we're still missing, and this is my kind of pitch to the folks in this room, is that we need more enterprise participants. Right, so I think, you know, the enterprise community, let's start with even financial services, the use cases that you have, you know, look at the models, make sure that they're covering the use cases that you have for those technologies that we do address, and also more importantly, even push your vendors to support the models. That's how we're going to get to a place where we have native support on devices.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot what our effort is through the Open Network State Format effort that we launched, is to start creating that advocacy and that user community of demand for these type of things. So we're kind of running up on time. Srini is in the room? Okay, so we've got time for a question.
Your use, right? Well, we've optimized out this overhead from the login. It's no longer the bottleneck. The bottleneck is now the cost of taking snapshots. We have snapshots. So VMware, talk to some folks there. Turns out that they're trying to bring in their snapshot costs as well. One of the benefits will have a better for the logs, we generate metadata. These packet access logs that are required in order to users demanding replay is how you think about it strategically. Is it, if it gets to the right state, does it become less of a... Where can we find out more before I go away?
I'll take a swing at it because of the initiative, right? I think what we're trying to say is, yes, we have heterogeneous platforms, but we should have somewhat standard models to control those platforms. And so there's not a lot of intellectual property in the interaction between those two. So let's remove it. Let's make this an analytics conversation. Let's push our industry's cycles towards solving the problems of our operators with 4 or 5 different screens, and they still don't understand what's happening in a network, and that's only getting more complex as not less. So that.
Yeah, I think it definitely getting more complex. But part of your question was, is it will that effort relax once we get to a certain point? And I believe it will, right? These are pillars that haven't been built because of how networking has progressed, and now we're addressing them, right? And this group's very important for that.
So I actually think with SDN, SD-WAN, and NFV, it's going to get even worse. So we're going to have more and more best of breed. We're going to be able to have more choice. And so getting that common data model or a common management layer is going to be even more important than before and even more complex than before.
It seems it's a different ideas about the data model depend on the different customer and different scenario. So do you think it is an option to establish the hierarchical model? This means some model may focus on the physical device, some model focused on the virtualized network, and some model focused on the policy-based model. So this means the software management architecture will realize a mapping mechanism for the different model. So this means based on this architecture can satisfy different customer requirement. For example, for Google, maybe you want more detailed control of the network. You rely on the low-level model. But for other customer, it just focus on interesting about the policy. So based on some more abstract model. Do you think this is an option for the architect? Yeah.
I'll just comment that we've purposely not tried to delve into kind of the policy and service layer in what we've done in OpenConfig so far, because as soon as you stray above kind of the infrastructure layer, and I think virtual networking would count as infrastructure. I think if lots of people are using common sets of technology there. Then you start to get into differences in how different operators, including enterprises, run their networks, what their integrations look like with other systems in their environments. I think trying to standardize that layer is basically going down a rabbit hole from which it'll be hard to emerge, right? So I think we're trying to focus on getting to common models on things that we can all agree on easily. And then if there's interest in defining service models that are common or policy models, sure, I would say go have at it. But in our experience so far, I think we've found it to be beneficial to stick to the things that at the infrastructure level that are easy to agree on across operators.
Okay. So we have to wrap our panel. Unfortunately, we're up on time, but thank you to this very esteemed panel. This was very interesting conversation. You can flag them down in the hallway and ask them more questions.